This is the last Velshi show. And I want to take these final minutes to tell you about our room. Not the studio and the cameras and the lights or the microphones. The room upstairs. The one you never see. For more than 6 years, our newsroom has been filled with journalists who chose this work at the exact moment in American history when it was most needed and most contested and most dangerous. Producers and bookers. Writers and researchers, people who spend their week fact-checking what the powerful said so that you and I could hold those words up to the light on weekend mornings. Journalists who came in on the days that the news was unbearable. And it was often unbearable. And they came back the next day and the day after that. My team, our newsroom. They built this show, and many of them have chosen to stay to give my successor the support that he needs to make this show his own, to make it better, to make it more important, more prepared to meet this moment. My longtime senior producer, Dina Moss, will become Jacob's executive producer. And there's no one who I would trust more with what we built here. My longtime executive producer and my partner in this mission, Rebecca Dryden, will come with me as we build the next iteration of the show that I started on at this network 10 years ago. That's the most important thing that I can tell you about our newsroom. It was never about me. It was about the work, and the work goes on. The work is journalism. And journalism starts with bearing witness. Journalism is the decision made every single day by people who could be doing something safer and more lucrative, to go to the place where something is happening, to look at it directly, to describe it as honestly as language allows, and to make sure the people who were not there, who cannot be there, or who have deliberately kept away from there know what happened. That's it. That's the whole of it. Ida B. Wells, at mortal risk, documented the epidemic of lynching in the American South at a time when the powerful preferred the world look away. Edward R. Murrow stood on the rooftops of London during the Blitz and described the burning of a city to Americans who had no other way to know. Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein did not bring down a president. The truth, uncovered by their reporting, brought down a president. The reporters who published the Pentagon Papers did not do it for fame or profit. They did it because a government had systematically lied to the American people about a war, and someone had to say so in print, on the record. That same Edward R. Murrow understood something else, too. Late in his life, he warned that television would amount to, quote, merely wires and lights in a box, unless the people who made it were determined to use it for something more. For 6 years, my team and I have tried to use it for something more. We tried to make it a mirror because a free press can hold that mirror up to the public, but only citizens can decide what to do about what they see. And let me tell you what bearing witness has looked like for me. It looked like standing on the platform at Budapest's Nyugati station as refugee women and children arrived after 30 hours on a train, women who had left everything behind, whose bank cards wouldn't work in Hungarian ATMs, whose SIM cards wouldn't connect to local networks, who had arrived in a country whose language was foreign to them, holding children who were too exhausted to cry. It looked like standing on a hotel balcony in Kyiv at night, watching American Patriot missiles for the first time in human history intercept a Russian hypersonic Kinzhal missile traveling inbound at Mach 10, a weapon the Kremlin had called unstoppable. The wreckage from that missile fell on an empty football stadium, and sometimes that's how history arrives, on an empty field in the middle of the night. But by the next morning, the world is different. It looked like meeting a 15-year-old girl in Poland who had escaped eastern Ukraine and then a year later traveling into the war zone to meet her father on the front lines in uniform, fighting for a country that had already taken everything from his family and to which he had returned anyway. It looked like sitting with Israelis who had fought for their lives on October 7th, and then with Palestinians who looked at me and asked why the world, why my country, had decided that their humanity was negotiable and that their lives were expendable. I had no satisfying answer, but I hope that by bearing witness, their humanity was at least entered into the record, that I made the world look at it directly so that no one could later claim that they didn't know what was happening with our tacit approval and our money. It looked like covering the Iran nuclear deal from Tehran, watching it come together, understanding what it prevented, and then watching it come apart at the hands of an American president who was determined to drag us into a war of choice at the behest of another autocratic and legally imperiled leader. A war that did not need to happen. History, you see, writes receipts. Journalists keep receipts. It looked like talking with Margaret Atwood, who wrote The Handmaid's Tale not in a comfortable remove, but in West Berlin in 1984, in the shadow of the wall, conjuring American autocracy while living within the sight of a very real one. I asked whether she believed when she was writing it that her fiction would become a legal and political framework in the United States of America. She said she always believed that. She and I first spoke on May 1st, 2022. The very next day, the Dobbs draft leaked. 53 days later, Roe v. Wade and equal protection for women under the law was gone. Bearing witness has always had a price, and in America, that price has never been as high as it is now. On May 30th, 2020, while covering a peaceful protest in Minneapolis, agents of the state fired a rubber bullet into my knee. My team and I kept going. We kept broadcasting because the story of George Floyd's murder and the protest that followed needed to be told. It is our job. And then, not in the heat of the moment, but months later, from the stage of a campaign rally to a cheering crowd, the President of the United States called the sight of my being shot by police, quote, the most beautiful thing, end quote. He said it was law and order. At another rally, he reassured the crowd that the rubber bullet had been traveling only 52 miles an hour. A real bullet, he explained, goes about 2,000 miles an hour. As if there were a velocity at which the deliberate wounding of a journalist by an agent of the state becomes acceptable. Last weekend, outside an ICE detention facility in Newark, New Jersey, I was escorted away by 7 police officers from covering a confrontation between protesters and police. I was not arrested. I was not charged. I was just moved. Removed from an unfolding news event in the United States of America, so that what was happening there could happen without a journalist watching. I was uninjured this time, but democracy, fairness, transparency, and accountability took yet another hit. This is how it unfolds, not always with legislation, not always with imprisonment, sometimes with a rubber bullet, sometimes with a police escort, sometimes with a president who calls the press the enemy of the people. Not once, not as a rhetorical flourish, but as a governing philosophy repeated until enough people believe it, and they believe that the next step becomes possible. The press is not the enemy of the people. The press is the people's guarantee that they will know what is done in their name. Some of the institutions that taught this country what bearing witness looks like are right now under pressure from, or perhaps in bed with, this administration. And that is not a coincidence. CBS News gave us Edward R. Murrow, but his most important broadcast was not from the roofs of London. In 1954, when Senator Joseph McCarthy was destroying lives with accusations and innuendo, a time that feels familiar to us today, Murrow turned the cameras on McCarthy himself and let the man's own words convict him. Quote, "We will not walk in fear one of another," quote. CBS gave us Walter Cronkite. When the government kept assuring Americans the war in Vietnam was being won, Cronkite flew there. He saw the Tet Offensive for himself. He came home and he told the truth. The war was a stalemate. That journalism by the most trusted man in America at the time contributed directly to the end of that war. That same CBS, the network of Murrow and Cronkite, paid $16 million to settle a lawsuit from this president that First Amendment lawyers called frivolous. The executive producer of 60 Minutes resigned on his way out, warning that the program's independence was being compromised. His successor was fired for trying to preserve that independence. PBS put the Senate Watergate hearings on gavel to gavel, rebroadcasting late into the night so that working people could watch them with their own eyes, what their government had done. The network Nixon tried to strangle bore witness to his own undoing. Today, our president signed an order to defund PBS and NPR. Congress eliminated more than $1 billion in their funding. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting closed its doors after 58 years. A federal judge ruled the order unconstitutional, but by then the money was gone. And now the administration wants career civil servants, the people who know what's actually being done in your name with your money, to sign non-disclosure agreements, strip away the legal language, and it's pretty simple. They're trying to make the witnesses afraid to speak while they prevent the press from reporting on what's really going on. A network they can sue, a public broadcaster they can defund, a civil servant they can silence. Each one is someone who might otherwise tell you something that the powerful would prefer that you never knew. That's why bearing witness has never mattered more than it does right now. And you don't have to be a journalist to bear witness. On Memorial Day 2020, a teenager named Darnella Frazier stood on a sidewalk in Minneapolis and held up her phone. She had no press credential. She had only the courage to keep reporting and recording what she was seeing for 9 minutes and 29 seconds when everything in her cried out to look away. Darnella Frazier's video changed the world. A police officer was convicted of the murder of George Floyd. She was a citizen doing the oldest thing that a citizen can do, holding power to account. Nearly 6 years later, on those very same streets of Minneapolis, 2 other American citizens were bearing witness to what their government was doing to their neighbors. Renee Good was a 37-year-old poet and mother of 3 who had stopped her car to support her neighbors. Her wife, Becca, later said, "We had whistles. They had guns." Alex Preddy was a 37-year-old nurse in the intensive care unit at the Minneapolis VA Medical Center, a man who spent his days keeping other Americans alive. Both were killed by federal immigration agents while bearing witness. Their deaths were filmed on shaky phones in bitter cold by other citizens who also refused to look away. The president posted to social media that Renee Good had violently, willfully, and viciously run over an ICE officer. Video analysis disputes that account. The officer walked away from the scene uninjured. She did not. The government called Alex Preddy a domestic terrorist who brandished a weapon at federal agents. Video analysis disputes that account. He was a VA nurse who made a decision to step outside and bear witness. Full stop. On January 6, 2021, a Capitol police officer named Eugene Goodman was alone in a corridor with no backup facing a mob. The mob was too big. He couldn't stop them. What he could do was lead them in the wrong direction, away from the Senate chamber where the vice president was being evacuated, buying them seconds that may have changed the outcome of American democracy. One man, one corridor, one decision. In 1920, a woman named Feb Byrne wrote a letter to her son Harry, who was a Tennessee state legislator. She urged him to vote for the 19th Amendment. He was the deciding vote. It passed by 1 vote. Women gained the right to vote in America in part because of 1 letter from 1 mother to 1 son. None of these people were famous before they acted. They had no resources. They had no platforms. They had no institutional power. They had a phone. They stepped into the street. They stood in a corridor. They wrote a letter. You see, history is not made by the powerful. It is made again and again by you, performing the small acts of courage upon which a just society is sustained. Some of those citizens, by the way, are also journalists. Let me tell you about one of them. In 2018, when this country began taking children from their parents at the southern border, he went to Brownsville, Texas, and got inside a shelter called Casa Padre, a former Walmart converted to hold hundreds of migrant boys, with a separate facility for what the government, in its bureaucratic cruelty, called tender-age children, the babies. He stood in front of that and called it what it was, a slow-motion national disgrace. He did not look away. He went back and back again and again. His reporting became a best-selling book, then a documentary, and he won notable awards. But the point is that he refused to let it happen in the dark. The country could no longer pretend it did not know what was happening. He bore witness. That is the entire job. And he's still doing it. In every place where the powerful would prefer there be no camera, no notebook, no witness, that award-winning journalist and author will take over this slot starting next Saturday. His name is Jacob Soboroff. You're in excellent hands. Trust him the way you trusted me, because he's earned it. You know this part. I wasn't born in this country. I was born in Kenya. I grew up in Canada. I came to America as an adult. I chose this country, not out of sentiment, not out of necessity, but because of what I believed it was capable of. I've reported from countries where the press is silent, where elections are theater, where asking the wrong question can cost you your freedom. I've seen up close what the absence of this great experiment looks like. I chose America. I still choose it because of what was built here, a nation founded not on blood or soil or a single faith, but on an idea and an argument and a set of rules generous enough on its best days to hold all of us. I choose it. I choose you. And I'm standing here in the studio as this program comes to an end, asking you who were born to it, who inherited it, or who, like me, chose it, to choose it again. Not because it's perfect. America has never been perfect. but because democracy works when ordinary people decide that it will work. And because when it works, there has never been anything like it. Because contrary to what the people counting on your indifference wants you to believe, citizenship in a democracy is not something you are handed. It is something you do. It is a choice to show up and engage with your neighbors, your community, your country. In this moment, your country needs you. I've interviewed princes and presidents and potentates and prime ministers, some of the most powerful people on the face of the earth, but it was never from them that I learned what democracy is made of or where it draws its strength. I was on the road meeting the people whose names will never appear in a headline, the ones who run for the school board, who show up to the meeting that no one else attends, who refuse stubbornly and beautifully and at real cost to be exhausted into indifference. That is where I learned the thing I now believe most deeply, that in a democracy, power does not flow down from the powerful. It rises from you, the authors of this democracy. I thought for a moment about taking the name of this show with me to my new show, but I can't take this show with me, not really, because what this became, thanks to you, was something very specific. A few hours of cable television on a couple of weekend mornings that had no business becoming as important as it did. It became important anyway, because you kept showing up for it. So I'm setting the name aside, retiring it like a jersey into the rafters. In the meantime, I'm not going anywhere. On Monday, June 15th, 140 days before you go to the polls, I will take the helm of the 11th hour from my friend and partner, Stephanie Ruhle. She returns to where she started on this network, 9 a.m. Eastern, and I return to where I started on this network at 11 p.m. The conversation you and I have been having on these weekend mornings is not one I am willing to give up. I'm simply going to have it with you somewhere else. So in a few moments, the last episode of Velshi will end. But before it does, here's what I need you to carry out of the studio. Thank you for 6 extraordinary years, for trusting us with your weekend mornings. You were the reason we came in every week, every story, every time the news was unbearable, and we came back anyway, for you. The Republic is not lost. It is deeply endangered. And endangered things can be saved, but not by waiting. You have 148 days between this morning and November 3rd, Election Day, to organize, to register voters, to have the conversations that need to be had, to show up for democracy. 148 days to prove what Darnella Frazier and Renee Good and Alex Preddy and Eugene Goodman and Feb Byrne understood, that one person is enough. It has always been enough. 148 days to send one unmistakable message. We will not look away. Together, we will bear witness. Together, we will hold power to account. Time is short, but together, we will rise to the challenge. We will restore America to its greatness. After 6 wonderful years, my time on this show is up. I thank you for yours.